Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. Since the launch of Nvidia's RTX GPUs for gaming laptops, I've been intrigued about the performance difference between the laptop and desktop variants. Unlike with previous generation Pascal GPUs, there is a distinct difference in specifications between GeForce 20 series products designed for power-constrained laptops and GeForce 20 series discrete GPUs designed for fully fledged gaming desktops. I've wanted to make a video definitively comparing the two for some time, and with this sort of lull period before Computex, I figured there's no better time to get some testing under my belt. Now, some viewers are probably already wondering, why do this analysis? It's obvious that desktop PCs offer better performance and better value, so do you really need to drop a great big turd on laptops? But that's really not my intention with this video. It's not meant to be a huge attack on gaming laptops because there are still reasons to buy one that I'll talk about later. The idea here is to show laptop buyers exactly how their systems will differ to a typical gaming desktop, which I think is especially relevant when Nvidia's naming scheme has muddied the waters a bit. So let's revisit the GeForce 20 series for laptops again and focus in on the RTX 2070, which is also what I'll be looking at today. Despite Nvidia using the exact same RTX 2070 name for the laptop and desktop variants, the laptop variant is clocked lower. It has the same CUDA core count and same memory configuration, but the boost clock is 180 MHz lower. So straight away, the desktop card is 13% faster in games that are shader limited, provided this clock behavior plays out in the real world. This situation of having the two versions called the same thing but differing in performance has already caught out a lot of people. I've seen many comments from those in our very own community who were surprised to discover that if they bought an RTX 2070 laptop, they actually wouldn't be getting RTX 2070 desktop performance, with desktop performance being mostly what we focus on the channel. So that's why I think talking about these differences, and especially these bad naming practices, is important. Today's testing is very simple. I've taken an RTX 2070 laptop and compared it to an RTX 2070 desktop in a range of games. I haven't tried to make this a super apples to apples comparison where I lock down the desktop's hardware so we can directly compare the GPUs, because the reality is there are many other factors that give performance advantages to desktops in most real-world systems. For example, laptops are limited to DDR4 2666 memory, whereas most PC builders will be using at least DDR4 3000, considering it's roughly the same price. And indeed for this testing, that's the speed difference we're seeing both with dual channel 16GB kits. But the biggest story is the CPU. Most gaming laptops are limited to 45-watt CPUs, and in particular use the Core i7-9750H, which is a 6-core, 12-thread CPU that's rated at a 2.6 GHz base and 4.1 GHz all-core boost. However, due to that power limit, the i7-9750H often sits in the mid-3 GHz range when fully utilized. In contrast, lots of desktop builders will choose something like the Core i7-8700K, which has a much higher 95-watt TDP and easily exceeds that on a regular basis. It's clocked at a 3.7 GHz base and boosts up to 4.3 GHz all-core, with typical behavior seeing that CPU sit locked at 4.3 GHz in a multi-threaded workload. From what I've seen, the 8700K is usually clocked 1 GHz higher or thereabouts. Now for this test, I could have chosen something much closer to the Core i7-9750H, like the 35-watt Core i7-8700T, but I thought it was more appropriate to use one of the most popular 6-core 12-thread gaming CPUs in the 8700K. I also could have chosen to beef it up more with an 8-core Core i9-9900K, but I thought I'd stick to 6-core models here so we can see how a 6-core laptop fares against a 6-core desktop. The laptop I've used today is the MSI GE75 Raider 9SF, which is equipped, as mentioned, with the RTX 2070 laptop variant, Core i7-9750H, 16GB of DDR4 2666, and a 1080p display. The desktop in question is my main test rig, with an RTX 2070 Founders Edition inside, plus a Core i7-8700K running stock, and 16GB of DDR4 3000, and I also tested with a 1080p display hooked up. And as a quick note, the Founders Edition RTX 2070 is clocked even higher against the laptop variant, 19% higher rather than 13%, but this is the same as a lot of factory OC cards that people buy. So let's kick the testing off here with Metro Exodus, and well, it's not looking too bad for the gaming laptop here. It is beaten by the RTX 2070 desktop, but only by 11% looking at average frame rates and 14% looking at 1% lows. So despite the RTX 2070 desktop card having nearly a 20% clock speed advantage, the real world impact in Metro is somewhat limited, which is nice to see. But things can also go in the complete opposite direction. In Resident Evil 2, the desktop RTX 2070 beats up on the laptop variant to the tune of 33%, which is a whopping margin. Given we are looking at frame rates well above 100 FPS here, I suspect this is a tag team job with the faster 8700K also lending some assistance to remove CPU bottlenecks. Hitman 2 is known to be a CPU demanding title, and that plays out similarly to Resident Evil 2, delivering a huge 34% advantage to the desktop system, although this diminishes to only 22% when viewing 1% low performance. Battlefield 5 is an interesting situation. When looking at average performance, we see the desktop pull ahead by a reasonable 12%, nothing that's going to make laptop owners cry. But in 1% low performance, it's clear the desktop is providing a smoother and more consistent experience with the 29% higher 1% low. Again, things like faster memory and a faster CPU help the desktop here significantly, whereas laptops can feel a little stuttery at times. The Assassin's Creed Odyssey results surprised me a little bit because I know this can be a very demanding title. However, the desktop is a mere 15% faster, which doesn't seem too bad up against the Hitman 2 or Resident Evil 2 results. There also isn't much difference in frame rate stability between the two systems. In Far Cry 5, we're back out to around that 19% margin with a 14% improvement to 1% lows in favour of the desktop system. So this is bang on the difference in clock speeds and fairly representative of the typical differences. Here we have Star Wars Battlefront 2, and like with Battlefield 5, this is another game that benefits from much better 1% low performance with the desktop system. 1% lows are 25% higher here compared to just a 16% higher average frame rate, again in favour of the desktop system. Watch Dogs 2 is another one of those games that tends to struggle a little on laptops given its heavy GPU and CPU requirements, despite being a few years old now. So it's no surprise to see that it too is a title with much higher gains to 1% lows than average frame rates when comparing the two systems. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a really interesting case and one of the worst for the laptop. Here the average frame rates are 32% higher on the desktop system, but the 1% lows are more than twice as high. The laptop has noticeable stuttering during some of the areas of the benchmark run, whereas the desktop does not, and I benchmarked this set of data at least 10 times because I really wasn't convinced about these margins, but every time the desktop absolutely smoked the laptop, so, well, here we are. And finally, I'm closing out the in-depth section with Grand Theft Auto 5, the oldest title here, but also still quite popular among gamers. The desktop RTX 2070 holds a 17% advantage in average frame rates, but surprisingly, the damage to 1% lows is limited to just 10%, which is one of the smallest differences I've seen so far. Here is the full performance breakdown comparing the RTX 2070 in desktops to the RTX 2070 in laptops across the games I've just talked about, plus a few extras thrown into the mix. When comparing average frame rates, we're left with the desktop clocking in 19% faster on average. Coincidentally, this is identical to the difference in clock speeds. Now I say coincidentally here because when we get a 19% clock speed improvement on paper, it's typical to see maybe a 15 to 16% improvement in real world performance. And as you can see, a lot of titles fall into that sort of bracket quite consistently. However, the average gain is boosted by a few outliers that benefit from the desktop PC's advantages in other areas like CPU performance. When comparing the difference in 1% low performance, things are a little more all over the place. There are some games where the difference really isn't that large, maybe only 11 to 13% in favor of the desktop, but then there are some significant outliers like Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Deus Ex Mankind Divided, where the desktop is literally twice as fast in this crucial metric. The overall average of 34% is listed here, but with this sort of variance, it's not all that useful. I haven't really talked about Max-Q laptops much in this video yet, but I thought I'd throw this data in here as well. This is the performance difference between the desktop RTX 2070 and the Max-Q variant of the RTX 2070. The Max-Q model is designed for even more constrained systems, typically thin and light machines, and is clocked considerably lower than the desktop and even the laptop variants. So it's no surprise that on average, the RTX 2070 for desktops is 42% faster. While this margin is enormous, at least the Max-Q model has a different name. So what is this data telling us? Well, simply put, the desktop RTX 2070 was clocked 19% higher in my test configurations than the laptop RTX 2070 and performed 19% better on average. While GPU boost does play around with clock speeds, there's not some magical wizard in the background boosting the laptop model up to the level of the desktop card. The difference in clock speeds on paper does play out in the real world. While this is generally the case, there are also some times where a desktop's other advantages assist with performance. A faster CPU helps with 1% low performance, as does faster memory, depending on where the bottlenecks lie. Better cooling capabilities allow the desktop to cope with a wider range of operating conditions without throttling, and of course the desktop has much higher scope for overclocking, which is typically very limited or even non-existent in laptops. But all of those additional factors are known. If you put an 8700K in a desktop, of course it will perform better than the lower clocked i7 9750H. Of course, a much larger desktop is going to have better cooling. The real issue here is that an everyday user might not know that the RTX 2070 in laptops isn't the same as the RTX 2070 in desktops, so you can't expect the same performance. And this issue is caused by both products having the same name. If you've seen performance or even just gameplay footage from an RTX 2070 in a desktop, how are you supposed to know this same GPU going on its name in a laptop is actually 16% slower unless you dig into the spec sheets? I really hope we don't see this confusion play out with future product lines. I hope Nvidia learns from the mess with doing this dodgy product naming stuff. I really don't like it, and I hope that with the next generation of products from them that they go back to either giving the laptops and desktops the exact same GPUs with the same specs or calling those laptop models something a little different. Aside from my complaints with naming, the other thing to talk about when comparing desktops and laptops is value. Desktop PCs are not only faster, but cheaper, even when factoring in peripherals that are integrated into the laptop form factor. The exact RTX 2070 test system I use costs around $1,700 to build yourself. And then you can throw in a 1080p 144Hz display, mechanical keyboard, and a decent mouse for about $300 more, and there you have a $2,000 system. MSI's GE75 Raider also costs $2,000, so at face value there's no difference in price, but there is a handy difference in performance with a win there to the desktop. However, my test system does have a few overkill components in it that are more designed for testing higher end configurations. You really don't need something like a Z390 Aorus Master or a H115i Platinum for a standard build. Swap a couple of those components out with more reasonable stuff and the entire system price drops to $1,800. So you end up saving $200 compared to the laptop and are left with better gaming performance. There is no doubt building a desktop PC and buying the necessary peripherals is a better bang for buck option than buying a gaming laptop. But again, this doesn't mean laptops are pointless. In fact, they have a very specific and handy use case, and that's portability. It's much easier to take around a slimish laptop to various places than it is to lug a desktop PC, monitor, keyboard, and mouse. So what you sacrifice in performance and value tends to go towards having everything in a highly portable form factor. With that said, it's important to keep this trade-off in mind when tossing it between a desktop and laptop. There are many times I hear of stories or know of people that keep their gaming laptop planted on their desk. They never take it around, and they even hook it up to external peripherals like perhaps a higher resolution display. These people really shouldn't have bought a gaming laptop. They should have gone down the desktop route, because if you're not actively harnessing the portability aspect of gaming laptops, well, you're missing out on valuable performance. So those are my thoughts on laptops versus desktops and how two systems with similar specs in some areas can differ in performance. This tends to be a question we get a lot in our Q&A series and on our videos as well. Should I buy a laptop or desktop considering my use case? What are the differences in performance and so on? So hopefully this video gives those people the information they were looking for. As always, you can subscribe for more content, and there's no better time than now with Computex just around the corner. Consider supporting us on Patreon, and I'll catch you in the next one.